communion with my Lord, hearing His voice in every line, making each faithful saying mine. More about Jesus, more about Jesus, more of His saving fullness see, more of His love who died for me.
Along in our study, we have looked at the fact that the Holy Spirit had given the apostles what He wanted them to teach. And so this Holy Spirit was sent by Jesus, who had many more things to teach the apostles, and perhaps for our sake, most importantly, things that He wanted the apostles to teach the church and everybody else. And so when we read the rest of the writings of the apostles and the prophets in our New Testament, these are the teachings that Jesus, through the Holy Spirit, wanted the apostles to teach. And so we observe and study and learn from all of it, and we follow it and live by it, because we understand that it is from the Holy Spirit and it is God's will for us. Now, that being said, since it's fitting, as I record this lesson, we have just finished our Sunday services, our worship services, on Easter Sunday, which is a pretty big deal to most of the Christian world. And so, when we examine the teachings of the apostles, one important question that may come to mind is, did they instruct about worship? Did they teach us how we are supposed to worship? Can we read the New Testament to see how the early and original church worshiped? And if that's the case, is it okay to celebrate things like Easter and Christmas and these sorts of traditions? Or should we view these things as worship that we need to be given special attention to? And the answer to that I think really the only answer we can give from the scriptures, from the Bible, is first and foremost with a question. What do you mean by celebrate? Do you mean as a tradition, or do you mean by worship? Because it depends from person to person how you view these holidays. Now, let's move on to probably the first question that will help us understand things. Did the Holy Spirit tell the apostles how He wanted us to worship? Is there a correct way to worship, or is God just happy and pleased with it all? Well, we have this actually answered for us in the Gospel according to John chapter 4. And when you look at John chapter 4, Jesus gives a statement in verse 24, and He says, God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and truth. Common verse. When we jump back up to verse 23, what Jesus had said just before, He says, but an hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For such people, the Father seeks to be His worshipers. And so spirit and truth, in spirit, the heart must be involved with the emotions and the joy and the people who are living a pleasing life to God, but with their heart involved in worship. But it has to be according to truth. So according to Jesus, there is a proper way to worship. Now, in this text, she makes a statement, this Samaritan woman, to Him in verse 20, where she says, our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you people say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship, or where they are supposed to worship, is what that word ought means, where they need to worship. So she's saying the Jews, they're saying that you need to worship in Jerusalem, but we, the Samaritans, worship on this mountain which was in Samaria. And Jesus actually addresses this in verse 22. He says, you worship what you do not know, and we worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. And see, Jesus makes the statement because in Deuteronomy, it was commanded in the law of Moses, which was given by God, that they worship in the place where God would make His presence, or the place He would choose. And when that temple was built in Jerusalem, that became then the place to worship. And so it was not correct for them to worship in Samaria, because God already made it clear worship needs to be done in Jerusalem. Now, that's under the Jewish system, under the old law of Moses. And Jesus goes on to say in John chapter 4 that in verse 23, an hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. So there's no longer that location. You don't have to go to this mountain or that mountain. That's no longer the case. But wherever you're worshiping the Father, it must be spirit and truth. So while the Spirit must be involved in our worship, it must be according to truth. And so there is a way to worship God in truth. Now, with that being said, how do we know how to worship God? Well, He gave us those instructions by the apostles. And so just like the Holy Spirit taught the apostles and instructed them what to teach the church in all matters of life, He also told them what kind of worship would be pleasing to God. And so when we read the New Testament and find those instructions, we have to try to the best of our ability to be the New Testament church who was worshiping Jesus according to the way that the apostles instructed. But why? Well, remember, because the apostles' message is from the Holy Spirit, and ultimately it's from Jesus, and it's what Jesus wanted to teach the church. And so there is a way to worship according to truth, and we will find it in the New Testament. And so if you're watching this video, I want to apply this to the topic of Easter and examine that next part. So if you get the chance, watch part 2 of this video.